A brief opening statement along with Senator Whitehouse, then we'll have Senator Grassley and Feinstein follow us in questioning, and it'll be 7-minute rounds initially, and we'll try to do a second round of 5 minutes. To both of the witnesses, thank you for coming. We'll try to make this as reasonably short as possible, and if you need a break, please let us know. So people wonder, what are we doing and what are we trying to accomplish? In January, the intelligence community unanimously said that the Russians, through their intelligence services, tried to interfere in the 2016 American presidential election, that it was the Russians who hacked Podesta's emails, it was the Russians who broke into the Democratic National Committee, and it was Russians who helped empower WikiLeaks. No evidence that the Russians changed voting tallies. How people were influenced by what happened, only they know and God knows, but I think every American should be concerned about what the Russians did. From my point of view, there's no doubt in my mind it was the Russians involved in all the things I just described, not some 400-pound guy sitting on her bed or any other country. Russia is up to no good when it comes to democracies all over the world. Dismembering the Ukraine, the Baltics are always under siege by Russian interference. So why? We want to learn what the Russians did. We want to find a way to stop them because they're apparently not going to stop until somebody makes them. The hearing that was held last week with Director Comey asked a question, is it fair to say that the Russian government's still involved in American politics? And he said yes. So I want House members and senators to know it was the presidential campaign in 2016. It could be our campaigns next. I don't know what happened in France, but somebody hacked into Mr. Macron's account, and we'll see who that may have been. But this is sort of what Russia does to try to undermine democracy. So what are we trying to accomplish here? To validate the findings of the Intelligence Committee as much as possible, and to come up with a course of action as a nation, bipartisan in nature, because it was the Democratic Party of 2016 were the victims. It could be the Republican Party of the future. When one party's attacked, all of us should feel an attack. It should be an Article 5 agreement between both major parties, all major parties, that when a foreign power interferes in our election, doesn't matter who they targeted, we're all in the same boat. Secondly, the unmasking, the 702 program. Quite frankly, when I got involved in this investigation, I didn't know much about it. Director Comey said the 702 program, which allows warrants for intelligence gathering and a vital intelligence tool. I've learned a bit about unmasking, and what I've learned is disturbing. So I don't know exactly all the details of what goes into unmasking an American citizen being incidentally surveilled when they are involved with a foreign agent. I'd like to know more, and I want to make sure that that unmasking can never be used as a political weapon in our democracy. So I'm all for hitting the enemy before they hit us. Intelligence gathering is essential, but I do believe we need to take a look at the procedures involved in 702, particularly how unmasking is requested, who can request it, and what limitations exist, if any, on how the information can be used. So that's why we're here. We're here to find out all things Russia, and the witnesses are determined by the evidence and nothing else. And the 702 reauthorization will come before the Congress fairly soon, and I, for one, have a lot of questions I didn't have before. I've enjoyed doing this with Senator Whitehouse. Senator Feinstein and Grassley have been terrific. Let it be said that the chairman and ranking member of the subcommittee have allowed us to do our job, have empowered us, and have been hands-on, and it's much appreciated. And with that, I'll recognize Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman Graham, for the important work this subcommittee is doing under your leadership, investigating the threat of Russian interference in our elections. In January, America's intelligence community disclosed that the Russian government, on the orders of Vladimir Putin, engaged in an election influence campaign throughout 2016. In March, FBI Director Comey confirmed that, and I quote him here, the FBI, as part of its counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election, and that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there is any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. The FBI and the intelligence community's work is appropriately taking place outside the public eye. Our inquiry serves broader aims: to give a thorough public accounting of the known facts, to pose the questions that still need answers, and to help us determine how best to protect the integrity and proper functioning of our government. At the subcommittee's first hearing on March 15th, we heard from expert witnesses about the Russian toolbox for interfering in the politics of other countries. Now we can ask, which of these tools were used against us by the Russians in 2016? Here's a checklist: propaganda, fake news, trolls, and bots. As Clint Watts told the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in March, Russian state-sponsored media outlets RT and Sputnik in the lead-up to the election, quote, churned out manipulated truths, false news stories, and conspiracies, end quote, providing a weaponized fake news effort openly supporting Donald Trump's candidacy, quoting again, while consistently offering negative coverage of Secretary Clinton. This was, to again quote Watts, a deliberate, well-organized, well-resourced, well-funded, wide-ranging effort, end quote, by Russia, using trolls and bots to amplify its messages, particularly across social media. These facts are not disputed by any serious person, so this is a yes on the checklist. Hacking and theft of political information. Throughout 2015 and 2016, Russian intelligence services and state-sponsored hackers conducted cyber operations against U.S. political targets, including state and local election boards, penetrating networks, probing for vulnerabilities, and stealing private information and emails. Attribution of these crimes to Russian actors was confirmed in our last hearing and by many other sources. So this is another yes. Timed leaks of damaging material. Russian intelligence fronts, cutouts, and sympathetic organizations like Guccifer 2.0, DCLeaks.com, and WikiLeaks then time the release of stolen victim data to maximize its political effect, manipulate public opinion, and thereby influence the outcome of an election. Longtime Trump associate Roger Stone admits to having interacted with Guccifer 2.0, and he foreshadowed releases of stolen data on Twitter in August and October 2016. Timing can matter. On October 7th, just hours after the damaging Access Hollywood tapes of Donald Trump were made public, WikiLeaks began publishing emails stolen from Clinton campaign manager John Podesta. So yes again. Assassination and political violence. Last October, Russian military intelligence reportedly conspired to assassinate the then Prime Minister of Montenegro as part of a coup attempt. In 2004, former Ukrainian Prime Minister Viktor Yushchenko was disfigured when he was poisoned in a suspected assassination attempt by Russian agents. Russian opposition figures are routinely the targets of state-directed political violence. Vladimir Kara-Murza has survived 2 recent poisonings, while Boris Nemtsov was brazenly murdered near the Kremlin in 2015. Thankfully, we have no evidence of that happening here. Investment control in key economic sectors. We learned from Heather Conley's testimony in our last hearing that the Kremlin playbook is to manipulate other countries through economic penetration, heavily investing in critical sectors of the target country's economy to create political leverage. Putin's petropolitics uses Russia's control of natural gas to create political pressure. But no as to that tactic here so far. Shady business and financial ties. Russia exploits the dark shadows of economic and political systems. FBI Director Comey testified last week that the United States is becoming the last big haven for shell corporations, where the opacity of the corporate form allows the concealment of criminal funds and can allow foreign money to directly and indirectly influence our political system. Since the Citizens United decision, we've seen unprecedented dark money flow in our elections from 501c4 organizations. We don't know who's behind that dark money or what they're demanding in return. Using shell corporations and other devices, Russia establishes illicit financial relationships to develop leverage against prominent figures through the carrot of continued bribery or the stick of threatened disclosure. How about here? Well, we know that President Trump has long pursued business deals in Russia. He's reported to have done or sought to do business there since the mid-1990s. As he chased deals in Russia throughout the 2000s, he deputized a colorful character named Felix Sater to develop real estate projects there under the Trump name. Sater's family has links to Russian organized crime, and Felix himself has had difficulties with the law. Sater said in a 2008 deposition that he would pitch business ideas directly to Trump and his team on a constant basis. As recently as 2010, Sater had a Trump Organization business card and an office in Trump Tower. Donald Trump Jr. said in September 2008 that he'd made half a dozen trips to Russia in the preceding 18 months, noting that Russian investors were heavily involved in Trump's New York real estate projects. "We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia," he said. One Trump property in Midtown Manhattan had become, within a few years of opening, a prominent depository of Russian money, according to a report in Bloomberg Businessweek. So here, there are still big questions. Of course, President Trump could clarify these questions by releasing his business and personal tax returns. Corrupting and compromising politicians. In testimony before the Judiciary Committee last Wednesday, Director Comey acknowledged that financial leverage has been exploited by Russian intelligence over many decades. Back to the days of Joseph Alsop, they used compromat, or compromising material, to pressure and manipulate targeted individuals with the prospect of damaging disclosures. Has Russia compromised, corrupted, cultivated, or exerted improper influence on individuals associated with President Trump, his administration, his transition team, his campaign, or his businesses? Another big question mark. We know that President Trump has had in his orbit a number of very Russia-friendly figures. In August 2015, Trump first met informally with Michael Flynn, who as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency had developed strong professional relationships with Russian military intelligence. In December of that year, Flynn traveled to Moscow for a paid speaking appearance at an anniversary gala for RT, where he was briefly seated next to Vladimir Putin. Quite a seat for a retired American general. 2 months after that trip, Flynn was reportedly serving as an informal national security advisor to Trump. Trump identified a little-known energy investor named Carter Page as one of his foreign policy advisors. In late March 2016, Page told Bloomberg Politics that friends and associates had been hurt by U.S. sanctions against Russia and that there's a lot of excitement in terms of the possibilities for creating a better situation, end quote. On April 27, 2016, Trump and several of his advisors, including Jeff Sessions, met Sergei Kislyak, Russia's ambassador to the United States, before a campaign speech. The speech, which was hosted by the Center for the National Interest, had been arranged by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Kislyak attended the Trump Republican convention, and he told the Washington Post that he had multiple contacts with the Trump campaign, both before and after the election. In the days after the November election, Russia's deputy foreign minister confirmed that his government had communicated with the Trump team during the campaign. And we know Michael Flynn spoke with Ambassador Kislyak on December 29th, the same day President Obama announced punitive sanctions against Russia for its interference in the 2016 election. Trump transition and administration officials thereafter made false statements to the media and the public about the content of Flynn's conversations with Kislyak, apparently as a result of Flynn having misled them. This eventually led President Trump to ask for Flynn's resignation, something I'm hoping Ms. Yates can shed some light on in her testimony today. The President and his administration have yet to take responsibility for or explain these and other troubling Russia links, dismissing facts as fake news and downplaying the significance of individuals involved. More than 100 days into the Trump administration and nearly 2 years since he declared his candidacy for president, only one person has been held accountable for improper contacts with Russia, Michael Flynn. Even then, the Trump administration has maintained that Flynn's communications with the ambassador were not, in fact, improper. He simply lost the confidence of the president. We need a more thorough accounting of the facts. Many years ago, an 18-minute gap transfixed the country and got everybody's attention in another investigation. In this case, we have an 18-day gap between the notification of the White House that a senior official had potentially been compromised and action taken against that senior official's role. At best, the Trump administration has displayed serious errors of judgment. At worst, these irregularities may reflect efforts at compromise or corruption at the hands of Russian intelligence. My sincere hope is that this hearing and those to come will help us find out. Thank you, Chairman.
Our two witnesses are well known, and I will be sworn in, but Mr. Clapper, the former Director of National Intelligence, has served his country for decades in uniform and out, and dedicated his life to intelligence gathering, and we appreciate that. Ms. Yates was the former Deputy Attorney General, is well respected by people in the legal profession. Thank you both for coming. If you will please rise. Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give this subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Clapper.
Chairman Graham, Ranking Member White House, and members of the subcommittee, certainly didn't expect to be before this committee or any other committee of the Congress again so soon, since I thought I was all done with this when I left the government. And this is only my first of 2 hearings this week. But understandably, concern about the egregious Russian interference in our election process is so critically serious as to merit focus, hopefully bipartisan focus, by the Congress and the American people. Last year, the intelligence community conducted an exhaustive review of Russian interference into our presidential election process, resulting in a Special Intelligence Community Assessment, or ICA, as we call it. I'm here today to provide whatever information I can, now as a private citizen, on how the intelligence community conducted its analysis, came up with its findings, and communicated them to the Obama administration, to the Trump transition team, to the Congress, and in unclassified form to the American public. Additionally, I'll briefly address 4 related topics that have emerged since the ICA was produced. Because of both classification and some executive privilege strictures requested by the White House, there are limits to what I can discuss. And of course, my direct official knowledge of any of this stopped on 20 January when my term of office was happily over. As you know, the IC was a coordinated product from 3 agencies, CIA, NSA, and the FBI, not all 17 components of the intelligence community, those 3, under the aegis of my former office. Following extensive intelligence reporting about many Russian efforts to collect on and influence the outcome of the presidential election, President Obama asked us to do this in early December and have it completed before the end of his term. The 24 or so analysts for this task were hand-picked, seasoned experts from each of the contributing agencies. They were given complete, unfettered, mutual access to all sensitive raw intelligence data, and importantly, complete independence to reach their findings. They found that the Russian government pursued a multifaceted influence campaign in the run-up to the election, including aggressive use of cyber capabilities. The Russians used cyber operations against both political parties, including hacking into servers used by the Democratic National Committee and releasing stolen data to WikiLeaks and other media outlets. Russia also collected on certain Republican Party-affiliated targets, but did not release any Republican-related data. The intelligence community assessment concluded, first, that President Putin directed an influence campaign to erode the faith and confidence of the American people in our presidential election process. Second, that he did so to demean Secretary Clinton, and third, that he sought to advantage Mr. Trump. These conclusions were reached based on the richness of the information gathered and analyzed, and were thoroughly vetted and then approved by the directors of the 3 agencies and me. These Russian activities and the resultant assessment were briefed first to President Obama on the 5th of January, then to President-elect Trump at Trump Tower on the 6th, and to the Congress via a series of 5 briefings from the 6th through the 13th of January. The classified version was profusely annotated with footnotes drawn from thousands of pages of supporting material. The key judgments in the unclassified version published on the 6th of January were identical to the classified version. While it's been over 4 months since the issuance of this assessment, as Directors Comey and Rogers testified before the House Intelligence Committee on the 20th of March, the conclusions and confidence levels reached at the time still stand. I think that's a statement to the quality and professionalism of the intelligence community people who produce such a compelling intelligence report during a tumultuous, controversial time, under intense scrutiny, and with a very tight deadline. Throughout the public dialogue about the issue over the past few months, 4 related topics have been raised that could use some clarification, and I'd like to take a few moments to attempt to provide that clarification. First, I want to address the meaning of, quote, unmasking, which is an unofficial term that's appeared frequently in the media in recent months and is often, I think, misused and misunderstood. So it frequently happens that in the course of conducting lawfully authorized electronic surveillance on validated foreign intelligence targets, the collecting agency picks up communications involving U.S. persons, either their direct interface with a validated foreign intelligence target or where there is discussion about those U.S. persons by validated foreign intelligence targets. Under intelligence community minimization procedures, the identities of these U.S. persons are typically masked in reports that go out to intelligence consumers, and they're referred to, each report at a time, as U.S. Person 1, U.S. Person 2, etc. However, there are cases when, to fully understand the context of the communication that has been obtained or the threat that is posed, the consumer of that collected intelligence may ask the identity of the U.S. person be revealed. Such requests explain why the unmasking is necessary, and that explanation is conveyed back to the agency that collected the information. It is then up to that agency whether to approve the request and to provide the identity. And if a U.S. person's identity is revealed, that identity is provided only to the person who properly requested it, not to a broader audience. This process is subject to oversight and reporting, and in the interest of transparency, my former office publishes a report on the statistics of how many U.S. persons' identities are unmasked based on a collection that occurred under Section 702 of the FISA Amendment Act, which I'll speak to in a moment. And in 2016, that number was 1,934. On several occasions during my 6.5 years as DNI, I requested the identity of U.S. persons to be revealed. In each such instance, I made these requests so I could fully understand the context of the communication and the potential threat being posed. At no time did I ever submit a request for personal or political purposes or to voyeuristically look at raw intelligence, nor am I aware of any instance of such abuse by anyone else. Second is the issue of leaks. Leaks have been conflated with unmaskings in some of the public discourse, but they are two very different things. An unmasking is a legitimate process that consists of a request and approval by proper authorities, as I've just briefly described. A leak is an unauthorized disclosure of classified or sensitive information that is improper under any circumstance. I've long maintained during my 50-plus year career in intelligence that leaks endanger national security, they compromise sources, methods, and tradecraft, and they can put assets' lives at risk. And for the record, in my long career, I've never knowingly exposed classified information in an inappropriate manner. Third is the issue of counterintelligence investigations conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. While I can't and won't comment in this setting on any particular counterintelligence investigation, it's important to understand how such investigations fit into and relate to the intelligence community and at least the general practice I followed during my time as DNI with respect to FBI counterintelligence investigations. When the intelligence community obtains information suggesting that a U.S. person is acting on behalf of a foreign power, the standard procedure is to share that information with the lead investigatory body, which of course is the FBI. The Bureau then decides whether to look into that information and handles any ensuing investigation, if there is one. Given its sensitivity, even the existence of a counterintelligence investigation is closely held, including at the highest levels. During my tenure as DNI, it was my practice to defer to the FBI director, both Director Mueller and then subsequently Director Comey, on whether, when, and to what extent they would inform me about such investigations. This stems from the unique position of the FBI, which straddles both intelligence and law enforcement. And as a consequence, I was not aware of the counterintelligence investigation Director Comey first referred to during his testimony before the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence on the 20th of March, and that comports with my public statements. Finally, I'd like to comment on Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Amendments Act, as it's called, what it governs and why it's vital. This provision authorizes the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to approve electronic surveillance of non-U.S. person, let me repeat that, non-U.S. person foreign intelligence targets outside the United States. Section 702 has been a tremendously effective tool in identifying terrorists and other threats to us, while at the same time protecting the privacy and civil liberties of U.S. persons. And as Chairman Graham indicated, Section 702 is due for reauthorization by Congress this year. It was renewed in 2012 for 5 years, and it expires on 31 December of this year. With so many misconceptions flying around, it would be tragic for Section 702 to become a casualty of misinformation and for us to lose a tool that is so vital to the safety of this nation. In conclusion, Russia's influence activities in the run-up to the 2016 election constituted the high water mark of their long-running efforts since the 1960s to disrupt and influence our elections. They must be congratulating themselves for having exceeded their wildest expectations with a minimal expenditure of resource. And I believe they are now emboldened to continue such activities in the future, both here and around the world, and to do so even more intensely. If there has ever been a clarion call for vigilance and action against a threat to the very foundation of our democratic political system, this episode is it. I hope the American people recognize the severity of this threat and that we collectively counter it before it further erodes the fabric of our democracy. I'll now turn to my former colleague, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, for any remarks that she has to make.
Microphone.
Thank you. Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to appear before you this afternoon on this critically important topic of Russian interference in our last presidential election and the related topics that this subcommittee is investigating. For 27 years, I was honored to represent the people of the United States with the Department of Justice. I began as an assistant United States attorney in Atlanta in the fall of 1989, and like all prosecutors, I investigated and tried cases and worked hard to try to ensure the safety of our communities and that those who violated our laws were held accountable. Over time, through 5 Republican and Democratic administrations, I assumed greater leadership positions within the department. In the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta, I served as chief of the Fraud and Public Corruption Section, as first assistant United States attorney, and then was appointed United States attorney. And then I had the privilege of serving as deputy attorney general for a little over 2 years. And finally, the current administration asked me to stay on as acting attorney general. Throughout my time at the department, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to work with the talented career men and women at the Department of Justice who followed the facts and applied the law with tremendous care and dedication, and who are in fact the backbone of the Department of Justice. And in every step, in every position, from AUSA to acting Attorney General, I always tried to carry out my responsibility to seek justice in a way that would engender the trust and the confidence of the people whom I served. I want to thank this subcommittee for conducting an impartial and thorough investigation of this vitally important topic. The efforts by a foreign adversary to interfere and undermine our democratic processes and those of our allies pose a serious threat to all Americans. This hearing and others this subcommittee has conducted and will be conducting in the future are an important bipartisan step in understanding the threat and the best ways to confront it going forward. As the intelligence community assessed in its January of 2017 report, Russia will continue to develop capabilities to use against the United States, and we need to be ready to meet those threats. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to take part in today's discussion. Now, I want to note that in my answers today, I intend to be as fulsome and as comprehensive as possible while respecting my legal and ethical boundaries. As the subcommittee understands, many of the topics of interest today concern classified information that I cannot address in this public setting. My duty to protect classified information applies just as much as a former official as it did when I led the department. In addition, I'm obviously no longer with the Department of Justice, and I am not authorized to generally discuss deliberations within DOJ or more broadly within the executive branch. particularly on matters that may be the subject of ongoing investigations. I take those obligations very seriously, and I appreciate the subcommittee's shared interest in protecting classified information and preserving the integrity of any investigations that the Department of Justice may now be conducting. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Senator Grassley, would you like to make a statement?
I don't want to, but it's okay.
Okay.
I don't want to.
Okay.
I've got questions.
All right. You'll get to ask them. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief. We have prepared for the committee, and I'd like to ask the staff to distribute it, a background and timeline on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and some of the key dates involved, which may be of help to the subcommittee. And I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the subcommittee. Chairman Graham and Ranking Member Whitehouse, I think you've done a good job, and your whole subcommittee has, and so thank you very, very much. I'd just like to make a few comments, if I might, and put all the remarks in the record. I think it is a foregone conclusion about Russia's involvement, and we see it replicated even in the French election, perhaps not to the extent or in the way, but certainly replicated. On February 9th, 2017, the Washington Post reported that either Flynn had misled the vice president or that Pence had misspoken. Lieutenant General Flynn resigned his post on February 13th, 4 days after the Post broke this story. There are still many unanswered questions about General Flynn, including who knew what and when. For example, the press is now reporting that in addition to the warning from Sally Yates, concerns were raised by former President Obama directly to then President-elect Trump, 95 days before Flynn resigned. So the question, what role did Flynn play in communications with the Russians, both after the first warning by President Obama and then after the warning by Sally Yates? And I hope to ask that today. What role did Flynn play in high-level national security decisions, again, both during the 95 days and the 18 days when the White House was on notice? So I look forward to hearing more about this from you, Acting Attorney General Yates. You have stated that you warned the White House on January 26th, nearly 3 weeks before Flynn resigned, that he had not been truthful and might be vulnerable to Russian blackmail. And finally, there are other troubling questions regarding Russia's relationships and connections with Trump advisors and associates. And there are questions about whether anyone was the target of Russian intelligence, either to be exploited or cultivated. So I will put my whole remarks in the record, Mr. Chairman, and I hope to ask some questions around these few comments. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yes, ma'am, without objection.
Mr. Chairman, may I also put into the record a letter dated November 18, 2016, from the ranking member on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Representative Elijah Cummings, giving then Vice President-elect Pence notice about certain what he called apparent conflicts of interest regarding General Flynn.
Without objection. General Clapper, on March the 5th, 2017, you said the following to a question. Here's the question. Does intelligence exist that can definitely answer the following question? Where there were improper contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, you said, we did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had anything that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report. Chuck Todd then asked, I understand that, but does it exist? You say, no, not to my knowledge. Is that still accurate?
It is.
Ms. Yates, do you have any evidence, or are you aware of any evidence that would suggest that in the 2016 campaign, anybody in the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government or intelligence services in an improper fashion?
And, Senator, my answer to that question would require me to reveal classified information, and so I can't answer that.
Well, I don't get that, because he just said he issued the report, and he said he doesn't know of any. So what would you know that's not in the report?
If I may, are you asking me or?
No, her.
Oh.
Well, I think that Director Clapper also said that he was unaware of the FBI counterintelligence investigation.
Would it be fair to say that the counterintelligence investigation was not mature enough to come to get in the report? Is that fair, Mr. Clapper?
That's a possibility.
What I don't get is how the FBI can have a counterintelligence investigation suggesting collusion, and you as Director of National Intelligence not know about it, and the FBI sign on to a report that basically said there was no collusion.
I can only speculate why that's so. There wasn't the evidence, if there was any, it didn't reach the evidentiary bar in terms of the level of confidence that we were striving for in that intelligence community assessment.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. Follow up on that. Are you familiar with the dossier about Mr. Trump compiled by some guy in England?
I am.
Did you find that to be a credible report?
Well, we didn't make a judgment on that, and that's one reason why we did not include it in the body of our intelligence community assessment.
You didn't find it credible enough to be included?
We couldn't corroborate the sourcing, particularly the second, third order sources.
Ms. Yates, are you familiar with the dossier?
Microphone.
If I could try to clarify one answer before as well, because I think, Senator Graham, you may have misunderstood me. You asked me whether I was aware of any evidence of collusion, and I declined to answer because answering would reveal classified information. I believe that that's the same answer that Director Comey gave to this committee when he was asked this question as well. And he made clear, and I'd like to make clear, that just because I say I can't answer it, you should not draw from that an assumption that that means that the answer is yes.
Okay, fair enough.
And I also think, if I may, sir, that this illustrates what I was trying to get at in my statement about the unique position that the FBI straddles between intelligence and law enforcement.
Okay. I just want the country to know that whatever they're doing on the counterintelligence side, Mr. Clapper didn't know about it, didn't make it in the report, and we'll see what comes from it. Ms. Yates, what did you tell the White House about Mr. Flynn?
I had 2 in-person meetings and 1 phone call with the White House counsel about Mr. Flynn. The first meeting occurred on January 26. I called Don McGahn first thing that morning and told him that I had a very sensitive matter that I needed to discuss with him, that I couldn't talk about it on the phone, and that I needed to come see him. And he agreed to meet with me later that afternoon. I took a senior member of the National Security Division who was overseeing this matter with me to meet with Mr. McGahn. We met in his office at the White House, which is a SCIF, so we could discuss classified information in his office. We began our meeting telling him that there had been press accounts of statements from the Vice President and others that related conduct that Mr. Flynn had been involved in that we knew not to be the truth. And as I tell you what happened here, again, I'm going to be very careful not to reveal classified information.
Well, the reason you knew it wasn't true is because you had collected some intelligence from an incidental collection system. Is that fair to say?
And I can't answer that because that, again, would call me for me to reveal classified
Let
information.
me ask you this. Did anybody ever make a request to unmask the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn?
And again, Senator, I can't answer a question like that that would call for classified information.
The case?
I don't.
Is there a way to find that out?
Well, in another setting, it could be discussed.
But there is a record somewhere of who
Sure.
would make a request to unmask the conversation with General Flynn and the Russian ambassador.
Well,
If one was made, there'd be a record of it.
I can't speak to this specific case, but I can generally comment that in the case of 702 requests, yes, those are all documented.
Okay, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is important to me. How did the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn make it to the Washington Post?
Well, which one of us are you asking?
Ms. Yates.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
All of us
I thought so.
would like to know that, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Nor do I know the answer to that.
Is it fair to say that if somebody did make an unmasking request, we would know who they were, and we could find out from them who they shared the information with? Is that fair to say? The system would allow us to do what I just described.
Well, unmasking requests are not made to the Department of Justice.
No, but to the agency who does the collection.
That's my understanding, is that,
So
yes,
there should be a record somewhere in our system whether or not an unmasking request was made for the conversation between Mr. Flynn and the Russian ambassador. We should be able to determine if it was made, who made it. Then we can ask, what did they do with the information? Is that a fair statement, Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what did you finish? What did you tell the White House?
Right. So I told them again that there were a number of press accounts of statements that had been made by the Vice President and other high-ranking White House officials about General Flynn's conduct that we knew to be untrue. And we told them how we knew that how we had this information, how we had acquired it, and how we knew that it was untrue. And we walked the White House counsel, who also had an associate there with him, through General Flynn's underlying conduct, the contents of which I obviously cannot go through with you today because it's classified. But we took them through in a fair amount of detail of the underlying conduct, what General Flynn had done, and then we walked through the various press accounts and how it had been falsely reported. We also told the White House counsel that General Flynn had been interviewed by the FBI on February 24th. Mr. McGahn asked me how he did, and I declined to give him an answer to that. And we then walked through with Mr. McGahn essentially why we were telling them about this. And the first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself. Secondly, we told him we felt like the Vice President and others were entitled to know that the information that they were conveying to the American people wasn't true. And we wanted to make it really clear right out of the gate that we were not accusing Vice President Pence of knowingly providing false information to the American people. And in fact, Mr. McGahn responded back to me to let me know that anything that General Flynn would have said would have been based, anything that Vice President Pence would have said would have been based on what General Flynn had told him. We told him the third reason is because we were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the Vice President and others. Because in the media accounts, it was clear from the Vice President and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them. And that this was a problem, because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the National Security Advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians. Finally, we told them that we were giving them all of this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate. I remember that Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not General Flynn should be fired, and I told him that that really wasn't our call, that was up to them, but that we were giving them this information so that they could take action. And that was the first meeting.
Thank you, and I'll go to Senator White. One very quick question. Are either one of you aware of incidental collection by our intelligence community of any presidential candidate, staff, or campaign during the 2016 election cycle?
Say that again, sir. I'm sorry.
Was there any incidental collection where our intelligence community collects information involving a presidential candidate on either side of the aisle during 2015 or 2016?
No, not to my knowledge.
I believe Director Comey was also asked this question and declined to answer it, so I need to follow the same lines that DOJ has drawn. Again, you should not draw from that my answer is yes, but rather that the answer would require me to reveal classified information.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
My response is all within the context of intelligence, foreign intelligence, not the domestic consideration.
Exactly.
Following the Comey line, the director testified a few days ago in the full committee that the FBI had interviewed Mr. Flynn a day before or 2 days before your meeting at the White House, and you just testified that you had told the White House counsel that the FBI had interviewed Flynn and McGahn had asked, how'd he do?
Right.
Did you have the 302 with you when you were in the White House? Did you show it to White House counsel? And had you seen it at the time you went up to the White House?
No. The FBI had conducted the interview on the 24th. We got a readout from the FBI on the 25th, a detailed readout specifically from the agents that had conducted the interview. But we didn't want to wait for the 302 because we felt that it was important to get this information to the White House as quickly as possible. So we had folks from the National Security Division who spent a lot of time with the agents, not only finding out exactly how the interview went, but how this impacted their investigation.
So did you take that summary with you? Do you have any document with you that described the FBI interview of General Flynn?
At the time that I was there, I had notes that described that interview, as well as the individual that was with me, the senior career official from the National Security Division, had been part of all of those discussions with the FBI.
Did you discuss criminal prosecution of Mr. Flynn, General Flynn?
My recollection is that did not really come up much in the first meeting. It did come up in the second meeting when Mr. McGahn called me back the next morning and asked the morning after, this is the morning of the 27th now, and asked me if I could come back to his office. And so I went back with the NSD official, and there were essentially 4 topics that he wanted to discuss there. And one of those topics was precisely that. He asked about the applicability of certain statutes, certain criminal statutes, and more specifically
about... This is the second meeting at the White House counsel's office. In his office again?
In his office again.
With the same 2 individuals?
Exactly.
On the following day?
Right.
And you went back pursuant to a phone call request, or was...
Yes, the morning of the 27th, after our meeting had occurred on the afternoon of the 26th, the morning of the 27th, Mr. McGahn called me and asked if I could come back to the White House to discuss this further. And we set up a time, and I went over there that afternoon, bringing again the same career official with me from the National Security Division who was overseeing this investigation. He had the same associate from the White House counsel's office, and we talked through 4 to 5 more issues.
You could perhaps have waited until you actually had seen the agent's 302 from the interview of General Flynn. Why go ahead of that? Why not wait?
Well, because this was a matter of some urgency.
Describe.
In making the determination about notification here, we had to balance a variety of interest. For the reasons that I just described a few minutes ago, we felt like it was critical that we get this information to the White House, in part because the Vice President was unknowingly making false statements to the public, and because we believed that General Flynn was compromised with respect to the Russians. We were balancing this, though, against the FBI's investigation, as you would always do, and take into account the investigating agency's desires and concerns about how a notification might impact that ongoing investigation. But once General Flynn was interviewed, there was no longer a concern about an impact on an investigation.
Do you know where that interview took place, or under what circumstances?
I believe it took place at the White House.
The Flynn interview?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if Flynn was represented by counsel at the time?
I don't believe he was.
Okay. And the scenario that you were concerned about was that you were seeing all these statements coming from the White House that were inconsistent with what you knew. You presumed that the White House was being truthful, which meant that Flynn was misleading them,
Right.
which meant that he was vulnerable to manipulation by the Russians who, knowing what had actually taken place, could call up the National Security Advisor to the President and say, you got to do this for us or we're going to out you with all your folks and your career is done.
That's right, because one of the questions that Mr. McGahn asked me when I went back over the second day was essentially, why does it matter to DOJ if one White House official lies to another White House official? And so we explained to him it was a whole lot more than that, and went back over the same concerns that we had raised with them the prior day, that the concern first about the underlying conduct itself, that he had lied to the Vice President and others, the American public had been misled, and then importantly, that every time this lie was repeated, and the misrepresentations were getting more and more specific as they were coming out, every time that happened, it increased the compromise. And to state the obvious, you don't want your national security advisor compromised with the Russians.
Were there any takeaways from the first meeting or action items that you left with?
Well, there was an action item in the second meeting because we talked about several issues, but...
To get the order right, you said earlier that there were 2 meetings and a phone call.
Right.
Was the phone call that set up the second meeting, or was there a third?
There was a third substantive phone call. There was a substantive phone call at the end. Sorry about that. One of the issues that Mr. McGahn raised with me in this second meeting, that again was on the 27th, the day after the first meeting, was his concern, because we had told him before that we were giving him this information so that they could take action. And he said that they were concerned that taking action might interfere with the FBI investigation. And we told him, both the senior career official and I, that he should not be concerned with it, that General Flynn had been interviewed, that their action would not interfere with any investigation. And in fact, I remember specifically saying, it wouldn't really be fair of us to tell you this and then expect you to sit on your hands.
Was the interview of General Flynn accelerated once you became aware of this information and felt you needed to get his statement quickly?
Well, we had wanted to tell the White House as quickly as possible, and we're working with the FBI in the course of the investigation, but certainly we did as the misrepresentations...
The first thing you know is that you have information that one thing was said and the White House is saying something different. Mm-hmm. And you know that that information, irrespective of who is involved, needs to get up to the White House quickly. And so at that point, the decision was made to do the interview so that that was locked down before you went up to White House counsel?
Right, so that that would not have a negative impact on the FBI investigation at that point. And there was a request made by Mr. McGahn in this second meeting as to whether or not they would be able to look at the underlying evidence that we had described for him of General Flynn's conduct. And we told him that we were inclined to allow them to look at that underlying evidence, that we wanted to go back to DOJ and be able to make the logistical arrangements for that. This second meeting on the 27th occurred late in the afternoon. This is Friday the 27th. So we told him that we would work with the FBI over the weekend on this issue and get back with him on Monday morning. And I called him first thing Monday morning to let him know that we would allow them to come over and to review the underlying evidence.
And was that the phone call, or is there a separate phone call?
There was the phone call initially to let him know I needed to come see him.
Yep.
2 meetings, and then a phone call at the end to let him know
that the material
was available. He had to call me back. He was not available then, and I did not hear back from him until that afternoon of Monday the 30th.
And that was the end of this episode? Nobody came over to look at the material?
I don't know what happened after that, because that was my last day with DOJ.
Got it. Okay.
That is.
Senator Grassley.
Yeah. Mr. Clapper, you said that you've never exposed classified information in an inappropriate manner. I asked Director Comey these questions last week, so for both of you, yes or no, as far as you know, has any classified information relating to Mr. Trump or his associates been declassified and shared with the media?
Not to my knowledge.
Ms. Yates?
Not to my knowledge either.
Okay. Next question. Have either of you ever been an anonymous source in a news report about matters relating to Mr. Trump, his associates, or Russians' attempt to meddle in the election?
No.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Third question. Did either of you ever authorize someone else at your respective organizations to be an anonymous source in a news report about Mr. Trump or his associates?
No.
No.
Okay. As far as either of you know, have any government agencies referred any of the leaks over the past several months to the Justice Department for potential criminal investigation?
I don't know. As you know, Senator, there is a process for that, for doing that. I don't know if that's happened.
Ms. Yates?
I'm not at DOJ anymore, so I don't know what's been referred.
So then I guess kind of sum up, neither one of you know whether the department authorized a criminal investigation of the leaks?
I do not, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Have any of you been questioned by the FBI about any leaks?
I have not been.
No.
Okay. I want to discuss unmasking. Mr. Clapper and Ms. Yates, did either of you ever request the unmasking of Mr. Trump, his associates, or any member of Congress?
Yes. In one case, I did. I can specifically recall, but I can't discuss it any further than that.
You can't. So if I ask you for details, you said you can't discuss that? Is that what you said?
Not here.
Okay. Ms. Yates, can you answer that question? Did you ever request unmasking of Mr. Trump, his associates, or any member of Congress?
No.
Question 2, did either of you ever review classified documents in which Mr. Trump, his associates, or members of Congress had been unmasked?
Oh, yes.
You have. Can you give us details here in this?
No, I can't.
Ms. Yates, have you?
Yes, I have, and no, I can't give you details.
Okay. Did either of you ever share information about unmasked Trump associates or members of Congress with anyone else?
Well, I'm thinking back over 6.5 years. I could have discussed it with either my deputy or my general counsel.
Okay. Ms. Yates?
In the course of the Flynn matter, I had discussions with other members of the intel community. I'm not sure if that's responsive to your question.
And in both cases, you can't give details here?
No.
No.
The FBI notified the Democratic National Committee of the Russians' intrusion into their systems in August of 2015. But the DNC turned down the FBI's offer to get the Russians out and refused the FBI access to their servers. Instead, it eventually hired a private firm in the spring of 2016. WikiLeaks began releasing the hacked DNC emails last July. It took roughly 27,000 of the 27,500 DNC emails it released were emails sent after the FBI notified the DNC of the breach. Mr. Clapper, would you agree that one of the lessons of this episode is that people should cooperate with the FBI when notified of foreign hacks instead of stonewalling?
Yes, sir. I generally think that's a very good idea.
Mr. Clapper, you sent the Russians, or you said the Russians did not release any negative information on Republican candidates. I believe that that's not quite right. On June the 15th, 2016, Guccifer 2.0 released to Gawker and the Smoking Gun more than 200 pages of the DNC's opposition research on Mr. Trump's, hundreds of pages of what I would call dirt. This happened just 2 days after the Wall Street Journal published a plan for Republican convention delegates to revolt to prevent Mr. Trump from securing the nomination. Why wasn't the Russian release of harmful information about Mr. Trump addressed in the Russia report, and was this even evaluated during the review?
I would have to consult with the analysts that were involved in the report to definitively answer that. I don't know personally whether they considered that or not.
Can you submit that as an answer in writing?
Well, I'm a private citizen now, sir. I don't know what the rules are on my obtaining classified potentially classified information, so I will look into it.
Okay. Mr. Clapper, you testified that the intelligence community conducted an exhaustive review of Russian interference, and the analysts involved had complete, unfettered access to all sensitive raw intelligence data. Do you have any reason to believe that any agency withheld any relevant information?
I don't believe so, with one potential caveat, which is that there is the possibility, again, acknowledging this role that the FBI plays in straddling both intelligence and law enforcement, that for whatever reason they may have chosen to withhold investigatory sensitive information from the report. I don't know that to be a fact. I was not apprised of that. I'm just suggesting that as a possibility.
Okay, my time's up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Yates, I'm not going to ask you anything that deserves a confidential or secure answer, but after your second in-person meeting with Mr. McGahn, you said there were 4 topics he wanted to discuss. Would you list those 4 topics?
Sure. The first topic in the second meeting was essentially, why does it matter to DOJ if one White House official lies to another? The second topic related to the applicability of criminal statutes and the likelihood that the Department of Justice would pursue a criminal case. The third topic was his concern that their taking action might interfere with an investigation of Mr. Flynn. And the fourth topic was his request to see the underlying evidence.
Were all those topics satisfied with respect to your impression after the second meeting?
Yes, the only thing that was really left open there was the logistics for us to be able to make arrangements for them to look at the underlying evidence.
And you did make those arrangements?
We did make those arrangements, but again, I don't know whether that ever happened, whether they ever looked at that evidence or not.
Fair enough. Apparently, Lieutenant General Flynn remained National Security Advisor for 18 days after you raised the Justice Department's concern. In your view, during those 18 days, did the risk that Flynn had been or could be compromised diminish at all?
You know, I don't know that I'm in a position to really have an answer for that. I know that we were really concerned about the compromise here, and that was the reason why we were encouraging them to act. I don't know what steps they may have taken, if any, during that 18 days to minimize any risk.
Did you discuss this with other DOJ career professionals?
Certainly leading up to our notification on the 26th, it was a topic of a whole lot of discussion in DOJ and with other members of the intel community, and we discussed it at great length. But after the 30th, again, I wasn't at DOJ anymore, so I didn't have any further discussions after that point about what was being done with respect to that.
Did you consult with other career prosecutors?
Oh, absolutely. We had really the experts within the National Security Division. As we were navigating this situation, they were working with the FBI on the investigation, and we were trying to make a determination about how best to make this notification so that we could get the information to the White House that they needed to be able to act.
So was the point that you were trying to make, yes or no will be fine, that General Flynn had seriously compromised the security of the United States and possibly the government by what he had done, whatever that was?
Well, our point is that logic would tell you that you don't want the national security advisor to be in a position where the Russians have leverage over him. Now, in terms of what impact that may have had or could have had, I can't speak to that. But we knew that that was not a good situation, which is why we wanted to let the White House know about it.
The Guardian has reported that Britain's intelligence service first became aware in late 2015 of suspicious interactions between Trump advisors and Russian intelligence agents. This information was passed on to U.S. intelligence agencies. Over the spring of 2016, multiple European allies passed on additional information to the United States about contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians. Is this accurate?
I can't answer that.
General Clapper, is that accurate?
Yes, it is, and it's also quite sensitive.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
The specifics are quite sensitive.
When did components of the intelligence community open investigations into the interactions between Trump advisors and Russians?
What was the question again, ma'am? I'm sorry.
When did components of the intelligence community open investigations into the interactions between Trump advisors and Russians?
Well, I can, I referred to Director Comey's statement before the House Intelligence Committee on the 20th of March is when he advised that they'd open an investigation in July of 16.
And what was the reaction when you advised that the investigation be opened as early as July 15th?
I'm sorry?
I thought you said that you advised on July...
No, Director Comey did before the House Intelligence Committee announced that the FBI had initiated an investigation in July of 2016.
Well, what did the intelligence agencies do with the findings that I just spoke about that the Guardian wrote about?
Well, I'm not sure about the accuracy of that article. So clearly, actually going back to 2015, there was evidence of Soviet, or Russian, excuse me, Freudian slip, Russian activity, mainly in an information gathering or reconnoitering mode where they were investigating voter registration rolls and the like, and that activity started early. And so we were monitoring this as it progressed, and certainly as it picked up, accelerated in spring, summer, and fall of 2016.